No house, no heater, no ready-made coat, no refrigerator. Only a thin layer of vulnerable skin remains, without fur, without a thick layer of fat, and a winter so harsh that it could take your life in just a few hours, even while you are sleeping. That is exactly the daily life of our ancestors, not in one terrible winter, but throughout hundreds of thousands of years, through real ice ages. Giant ice sheets covered entire continents. Temperatures dropped to levels where even the best-equipped animal species had to struggle. And we humans, a species born in hot Africa, looking as if someone forgot to hand over the survival kit when taking us out of the warm place, had to face all of that with bare skin. Yet they still survived. You are the proof. Each of your ancestors lived long enough to pass on life to the next generation. That means they won the battle against the winter that they could not afford to lose. They did what seemed biologically impossible. How could a weak animal species lacking fur, lacking fat, without the ability to hibernate like bears, survive through the coldest conditions the Earth ever threw at humans? That is one of the greatest survival stories we have, but also the story that very few people know exactly how close we came to not making it through. Today, we will explore together exactly how our ancestors accomplished it. From fires reaching temperatures over 600 degrees Celsius to the small bone needle that could be the most important invention in human history. From houses built with hundreds of mammoth bones buried deep in the frozen ground, to architectural designs so intelligent that modern science still nods in approval. And the controversial hypothesis that some ancient humans may have hibernated like bears to get through the deadly winters. This is not just a story about survival. This is a story about intelligence, creativity, and mysteries that to this day we still do not have the final answer for. To understand clearly what our ancestors did, first we must face a rather harsh truth. Biologically, humans were almost the unluckiest animal species to survive the Ice Age. The last Ice Age reached its peak about 26,000 to 19,000 years ago. At that time, giant ice sheets several kilometers thick covered most of Europe, Asia, and North America. The entire landscape became flat, white, and frozen solid. Strong winds blew endlessly. Trees were so sparse as to be almost non-existent, and food sources nearly disappeared for many months in a row. This was not a winter that was a bit cold, as we usually think. This was real freezing hell, where death could come in just a few hours if you were not protected properly. And what about us humans? We were originally a species born in hot Africa. Thin skin, no thick fur like mammoths, no thick insulating fat layer like seals, and certainly no ability to slow heart rate or hibernate like bears. Without clothing, a healthy adult could freeze to death in just a few hours when temperatures dropped sharply. We looked as if someone had forgotten to deliver the basic survival kit when bringing the human species out of the warm environment. Meanwhile, other animal species were much better equipped. Mammoths had long fur and thick fat to withstand the cold. Cave bears could hibernate for months, minimizing energy needs. Reindeer migrated thousands of kilometers to find food. And us? We only had our minds and dexterous hands. In purely biological terms, humans were almost the wrong species, wrong time, on Earth back then. But precisely this weakness forced our ancestors to do what no other animal species did. They had to figure out how to completely change the environment around them. They could not wait for their bodies to adapt through thousands of years of evolution. They had to create a second layer of protection for themselves, an artificial protective layer, right away. And the first, most important protective layer they created was fire. Fire was the first thing that helped our ancestors turn a hostile planet into a place that could be lived in. Humans had known how to use fire from very early on, at least 300,000 to 400,000 years ago. By the Ice Age, fire was no longer just a convenient tool, but became an absolutely vital survival factor. It provided heat, cooked food, hardened stone and bone tools, and illuminated the endless long nights of the polar regions. But what we must admire is the way our ancestors used fire in an extremely creative way under the harshest conditions. In Ukraine, archaeologists have discovered Ice Age hearths that reached temperatures over 600 degrees Celsius. hotter than 1,100 degrees Fahrenheit. That was a level of heat sufficient to melt some types of metals, not to mention enough to warm an entire living space in freezing outdoor conditions. The problem is, on the tundra, there were almost no trees. Wood became a luxury item. So what did they do when the firewood ran out? They switched to burning animal fat and bones. This was not a random solution. Fat and bones contain extremely high energy content, burn for a long time, and give off strong heat. Moreover, they were always available whenever humans hunted large animals. Like the saying, no firewood, then use what you just hunted. A solution that was both practical and somewhat terrifying if you think about it carefully. But it was extremely effective. Fire from fat and bones helped them maintain the necessary temperature to survive through long nights and snowstorms that lasted for weeks. More importantly, fire did not only keep warmth in place, it also opened the way for everything else. Thanks to fire, humans could process animal skins better, harden tools, and most importantly, create a mobile protective layer, that is, clothing. Without fire, even the most skillfully sewn skin garments would not be enough to keep warm in Ice Age conditions. In other words, fire was the operating system of survival. All later inventions, from clothing to houses, were built on the foundation of this small but powerful flame. And when fire had solved the problem of keeping warm in place, our ancestors faced the next challenge: how to bring warmth along when moving. The answer lay in a small but revolutionary invention, the bone-sewing needle. When fire had solved the problem of keeping warm in place, our ancestors faced a bigger challenge: how to carry warmth while moving across the frozen land. The answer lay in a small but revolutionary invention, the bone-sewing needle. About 30,000 years ago, humans had manufactured sewing needles from bone, or ivory. This needle had a meticulously drilled hole allowing the sewing of tightly closed seams. For the first time in history, they could create fitted, multi-layered clothing sets with sleeves sealed shut, wrists and pant hems sewn close to the body. Previously, animal skins were only loosely wrapped around the body, like you draping a blanket and going for a walk in a snowstorm. Heat escaped everywhere. Wind blew in through every gap. The heat retention efficiency was almost zero in harsh conditions. But with the bone-sewing needle, everything changed completely. They could sew body-fitting cloaks, gloves, waterproof boots from deerskin. The tightly closed seams helped block wind and keep heat inside. This was the leap forward that allowed humans to push the living boundary into the coldest regions on Earth, places where almost no one dared to tread before, not stopping only at the sewing needle. Archaeological evidence shows that humans had known how to use bearskin to make cloaks from at least 300,000 years ago. At the Schöningen area, Germany, scientists discovered cut marks on bear leg bones, clear evidence of them skinning bears to make coats. Bear skin was not only thick and warm, but also had quite good wind and water resistance. However, loosely wrapped skin still left many weaknesses in heat retention. To overcome this, they also smeared animal fat, tallow, on the face, neck, and exposed skin areas. This fat layer acted as a natural insulating layer, sealing pores, retaining heat, and preventing wind from blowing directly onto the skin. This was a simple but extremely effective solution, like applying moisturizer, but to survive. In the far north, where bright light reflecting from snow and ice could cause snow blindness in just a few hours, they also created a primitive type of sunglasses from thin bone or wood. Pieces of bone were carved with narrow slits, tied across the eyes to reduce the amount of glaring light entering the eyes. A small invention, but one that saved the lives of many hunters in the all-white snow environment. The interesting thing is that evidence shows early modern humans, Homo sapiens, had significantly more effective clothing than Neanderthals of the same period. The difference in the ability to tailor fitted clothing may have been one of the factors that helped our ancestors survive and spread widely, while Neanderthals gradually disappeared. In other words, clothing was not just a body covering, it was the second artificial skin layer, a skin that humans designed and continuously improved themselves. And this skin layer allowed them to do what no other animal species could do: live and move comfortably in an environment that their biological bodies were not originally designed to exist in. But even with fire and the best clothing, they still needed a more secure shelter to live through the endless long nights and snowstorms that lasted for weeks. And right at this moment, they created one of the most impressive architectural constructions of the Ice Age period. Houses built entirely from mammoth bones. Even when they already had fire and the best clothing, our ancestors still needed a more secure shelter to survive through the endless long nights and snowstorms that lasted for weeks. And they did something that few people expected: build houses using mammoth bones. At Mezhyrich, Ukraine, archaeologists have discovered round house structures built entirely from hundreds of mammoth bones during the coldest stage of the last ice age. These houses date to about 18,000 years ago, or even earlier according to the latest studies. Mammoth skulls and leg bones were buried deep into the frozen ground to serve as a solid foundation. Rib bones and curved tusks formed the domed roof frame. The entire structure was then tightly covered with animal skins, moss, earth, and snow for insulation. These were not just temporary huts. These were real architectural works, one of the earliest examples of monumental architecture of the human species. Collecting and transporting tons of mammoth bones required large-scale cooperation, detailed planning, and deep understanding of materials. These houses could be reused through many seasons, even across many generations. But what truly makes us astonished is the level of intelligence in the design. They applied simple but extremely effective physical principles: the cold trap doorway. The entrance was dug much lower than the sleeping area. Because cold air is heavier, it would sink down to the floor, while warmer air, created by fire and body heat, would remain above, where the family slept. The result was that heat was retained to the maximum even when the door was opened at night. They also used snow as an excellent insulating material. Snow was piled thickly outside the house walls. Although it sounds counterintuitive, snow actually provides better insulation than open air. Thanks to this, the temperature inside the house could stay close to freezing point even when outside it dropped to minus 30 degrees Celsius or lower. Gaps in the walls were sealed with moss, mud, and resin from pine trees. Building in areas with forests also helped reduce the impact of strong winds on the open tundra. In other words, our ancestors did not just take shelter, they proactively designed their living environment. They understood basic physical principles: cold air sinks, snow insulates, wind, and applied them skillfully without needing any modern technology. While we today still often complain about weak air conditioning or houses that do not retain heat well, our ancestors built passive houses that kept warm effectively using only bones, skins, moss, and snow. These constructions were not just shelters. They are clear evidence of the social complexity and labor organization ability of Ice Age humans. To build a house like that, coordination among many people, sharing knowledge across generations, and a mutual support system when resources were scarce were required. But even with such solid houses, there was still another challenge that our ancestors had to face during the long, endless winter months: how to conserve energy when food nearly disappeared. And right at this moment, the most controversial scientific hypothesis was put forward: that some ancient humans may have hibernated like bears to get through the deadly winter. Even when they already had fire, good clothing, and solid mammoth bone houses, our ancestors still had to face a problem that was almost impossible to solve with the technology of that time: how to conserve energy when food nearly completely disappeared during the long, endless winter months. Right at this moment, a bold scientific hypothesis that sparked fierce controversy was proposed. Some ancient humans may have hibernated like bears to survive the harsh winter. In 2020, researchers Antonis Bartsiokas and Juan Luis Arzuaga published a study analyzing hominin bone remains at Cima de los Huesos, Bone Pit, in the Atapuerca Cave, Spain. These bones date to about 430,000 years ago, belonging to an extreme Ice Age period. When studying the injuries and growth patterns of the bones in detail, they found signs very similar to what occurs in hibernating animals. Specifically, they found cyclic patterns of bone injuries, growth interruptions in adolescence, and signs of metabolic pathologies such as hyperparathyroidism and rachitic osteoplaques. Bone injuries characteristic of severe malnutrition combined with repeated waking and sleeping again processes. These traces were identical to those seen in bears and hibernating animals when they had to live off their own fat reserves for many months. The hypothesis proposes that, during the coldest periods, when fatty food was almost non-existent, these ancient humans may have retreated into caves, drastically reduced their body metabolism, reduced eating and drinking, and fallen into a state of hibernation or torpor, a state of reduced biological activity lasting for months. They almost waited out the winter instead of having to hunt or move in harsh conditions. This hypothesis also aligns with genetic evidence and the extreme ice age conditions at that time. However, this is a hypothesis that is being very strongly debated in the scientific community. Many researchers argue that the bone injuries could have been caused by other factors, such as simple malnutrition, illness, or harsh living conditions without the need for a hibernation mechanism. Modern humans, although capable of reducing metabolism in some special cases, such as in medicine, no longer possess the real ability to hibernate like bears. Attributing this ability to ancient humans remains a matter of controversy. Nevertheless, the idea that our ancestors may have hibernated to survive the deadly winter sounds both scientific and interestingly fantastical. It shows the level of desperation and creativity that humans had reached in the battle for survival, to the point that they were willing to shut down almost their entire body just to wait out the harshest months and days. And whether this hypothesis is ultimately true or not, one thing that cannot be denied is our ancestors won. They not only survived the Ice Age, they also developed, spread out, and left behind a legacy that we are enjoying today. Now let us summarize the entire extraordinary survival journey. Our ancestors won. They were not the strongest species, not the best equipped biologically, and certainly not the species pre-adapted to the cold. They were just an animal species with thin skin, born in hot Africa, having to face a long, endless ice age, where death could come in just a few hours if not protected. Yet they survived. And they did it in a way that no other animal species could. They created a second layer of protection for themselves. They created fire, not only to warm themselves, but also to cook food, make tools, and open the way for everything else. They invented the bone sewing needle, turning loosely wrapped skins into fitted, multi-layered clothing that helped them move comfortably in the harshest environments. They built houses from mammoth bones with intelligent designs, cold trap doorway, insulation with snow, turning caves and tundra into real shelters. And possibly, although still controversial, some ancient humans knew how to hibernate in their own way to conserve energy through the deadly winters. All of these things were not the result of ordinary biological evolution. That was the result of intelligence, creativity, and the ability to cooperate. Humans did not have thick fur, did not have an insulating fat layer, did not have the ability to hibernate like bears. But we had something that no other species had, the ability to figure out how to survive even when everything seemed against us. We may not be the strongest species on Earth, but we are the only species that knows how to turn challenges into opportunities, knows how to design our living environment instead of just waiting for our bodies to adapt. And thanks to that, today we are sitting here, in a warm room, with coats hanging ready, and food in the refrigerator. Things that our ancestors could only dream of. The story of surviving the Ice Age is not just a story about the past, it is a reminder of the extraordinary adaptability of the human species. In the modern world, full of conveniences, we easily forget that our life today is the result of hundreds of thousands of years of struggle, creativity, and never giving up. What do you think about the hibernation hypothesis of ancient humans? Are there still other secrets about how our ancestors survived that we do not yet know? Please share your thoughts in the comments section below. If you find this video interesting and want to explore more mysteries about human history together, please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. We will continue to bring engaging and in-depth scientific stories. Thank you for watching until the end of the video. See you again in the next journeys.